Happy Tuesday, everybody. Hope you're doing well. So we're going to be doing the community deck tech. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do it next week. I might have to take some time off until the week of the 24th. So I'll probably post it on the 22nd. And I'll take 1 week off, and then we'll be back to doing it on the 29th, just because of my scheduling. So, but what I do is thank you for your submissions. There's too many for me to cover. And actually put it takes a fair amount of time and energy to go into each archetype and brainstorm ideas and all of that, right? So I pick 4 each week, and I do it randomly. I assign a name to each person. So even though Zigzag put in 2 decks, I only put 1 number on their name, and then I just roll a die and do it, RNG style. So with that, let's get started. So the first deck that we're going to review here is Temur Ramp by Tim Lesabir. And this one, so they're stuck on wild cards. They don't have enough rares to build the deck that they want to in its full form. So, like for example, the Urza's rebuff, they've said should be the 3 steps ahead. So what I do first when I look at a deck is I look at are the lands good? Right, and I think that what you've got going on here is better than I usually see in a 3-color space. So you've got 16 blue, which is nice for your turn 1 into the Floodmaw to prevent getting killed by the Rakdos aggro leyline deck. You've got 15 red, and you've got 15 green, which is plenty to cast all of your spells. So one thing to keep in mind, though, is how many of these sources are tapped. So I think 7 of them are tap lands, if I counted them correctly, as far as you're into the Floodmaw, which means you're not going to be able to cast this as consistently on turn 1, unless you're going to mulligan for an untapped blue source. The turn 2, Fires of Victory, if we need to do early interaction, it's nice to have at least 13 red, you're good there. You've got the turn 3 Cornucopia, which would be... you would need 12 green for that one, and you have 15, so you're good there. This would be 13 if you want to cycle this Pop Hatch formation, which we'll talk about here in a second. So the 4 double pips, like the playing out the Hornlock Whale or playing out the Overlord of the Boiler Bilges without using the impeding cost, is looking at 13. So you want 16 if you're going to be doing the 2cc for the impeding. So you're a little bit shy on the red there, but not too bad. And then the 1 double pip for Urza's rebuff, or even the 3 steps ahead, because the 3 steps ahead still cancel for 1 double pip blue. That one you're going to want 18, and so you're a little bit shy on the blue there. But if you're going to be casting it on turn 4, you're fine with 16 sources of lands. So as far as your total land count, though, I think you're a little bit low. Most of the time I see this archetype wanting to run 27, and you're actually going more expensive than some of the other versions that I've seen, just because of being able to, the steaming sauna side of the rooms helps you if you have more mana than not. So I think you might want to consider bringing back in 2 lands. So the general strategy of this deck is to ramp into, Ancient Cornucopia. You've got the Wrath of Ill-Timed Explosion, and we'll talk about some alternatives that are typically included in this archetype that we're not seeing here, to kind of bring in these other new cards that we got in Duskmourn. So the first one we've talked about is the 3 steps ahead instead of the Urza's rebuff. And then you've taken out 2 Fires of Victory. This is my speculation, at least. Taking out 2 Fires of Victory to bring in the 2 Roaring Furnace, which works the same. It deals damage equal to the number of cards in your hand, but it's at sorcery speed as an enchantment instead of as an instant. And then the upside is that you then get more value out of the card by being able to do the Steaming Sauna to then outvalue your opponent through card draw. It looks like you've dropped 1 Roxanne and 2 Hornlock Whales and 1 Doppelgang and Kellen, Inquisitive Prodigy, which I see a lot of times in this Temur Ramp kind of decks. And you're bringing in the Make Your Own Luck and the Overlord of the Boiler Bilges. Now, you may not be doing these exact substitutions, but from how I'm familiar with the archetype, that's kind of how I'm looking at the deck. And so if people want to reverse engineer it, I'll just lay it out that way. But I like those substitutions because basically you're just taking out like alternative win conditions. So Hornlock Whale, Roxanne, Doppelgang, Kellen to an extent, and Roxanne to an extent, for your own versions of like how you're going to win the game ultimately. And then you're dropping the Invasion of Arcavios, which see a lot of times as a one of in this archetype, and bringing in one roller crusher ride as an alternative win condition. And I also think that that's a perfectly fine substitution. We did used to see Brotherhood's End in this archetype as so you have the turn 3 Wrath and the turn 4 Wrath of Ill-Timed Explosion, and that was more important when you were dealing with the go wide strategies, where you might need to wipe the board like against Celestine Rabbits sooner. But since Celestine Rabbits isn't around anymore, I think that substituting into the Floodmaw for single point interaction that can hit non-land permanents like Leylines is a pretty good one to explore. And as long as you tweak the mana to reflect that, which I think you have, I support that decision. So the last little substitution is dropping the 2 lands to bring in the 2 copies of the Paw Patch formation. And I think that you should be like, if you had 3 Paw Patch formations, I would cut 1 land, right? So if you have a cycler that, a 1 mana or a 2 mana that helps you card draw, then you can use that to justify going to a lower land count. And I think it's actually between 3 and 4, but if you have 3, I'll allow it. But you're going for 2 here, and you're dropping 2 lands. So it doesn't feel quite right to me. It feels a little bit like I think I would rather just have the mana. Now, this is a pretty relevant card right now, being able to destroy enchantments, Caretaker's Talent, things like that. Depends on if you're running it in best of 1 or best of 3. But my thoughts on it is that it's a little bit low for if you're running it in best of 3. Now, in best of 1, because of the hand smoother, you typically can shave lands from your deck if you're aggro. This deck is not, right? So the best of 1 hand smoother affects lands 1, 2, and 3, and then by turn 4 is basically equivalent to what it was without it. And from my understanding, you can do your own research. But with that being said, like this is a control deck ultimately that's looking to wrath your opponent and ramp into your large threats and win the game that way. So I really don't want to have a stumble on lands. So I do think that we should bring in a total of 27. There are a couple of lands that I typically see in this. So the Shivan Reef would allow you to have the higher untapped sources of blue for Into the Floodmaw. You could do the same thing for the Carplusian Forest for red and green, although I don't think this list specifically needs that. Would have to actually kind of get down into the nitty gritty with like a hypergeometric calculator if you really wanted to get super nerdy about how many tap lands is too many before you start affecting your various turns within the curve. Restless Vinestalk too is one that I've seen a lot in this archetype that you could bring in that would maybe give you a better alternative if you yourself are getting controlled. And then the Fountain Port and Mirrex also I feel like are pretty good to have as one-ofs, just for especially if you are flooding out and drawing a whole bunch of lands, then this kind of also solves the flood on top of like having the extra rooms. So thanks for the submission though, Tim Lesabir. I hope my suggestions and comments find you well. Obviously I think that the deck as is pretty fun, looks good, and thank you for your submission. The second community submission was Vren-tless Rats by Grimgeist. And so this one, the lands look good for best of 3. So you got 25, and I think that's about right. In best of 1, you could probably shave like a land. Then again, you have enough stuff to do on turn 4 and onward that it's probably not worth doing. As far as the way that I look at this deck, so I look at the Temur Rats deck kind of before we got the cards from Duskmourn, like Nashi, right? And so I think you've cut some Azure Beastbinders. Looks like you ditched the Nezumi Informants, which are another black rat alternative that makes your opponent discard a card. And, those are fine, right? And you've ditched the 2 copies of the Shoreline Looter. And that one I miss a little bit more because the Looter itself being unblockable, being able to give you that card draw is pretty fantastic. But you're bringing in 4 copies of the... 2 copies of the Gnawing Vermin. And this one kind of works instead of the Nezumi Informants, right? And you're making room on all of these 2 drops to bring in Nashi, Searcher in the Dark. And Nashi is a legendary creature, so I'm a little bit hesitant to run 4 of them, just because if you do have that moment where you have multiple Nashis in hand, it can be like kind of a brick. But if it is an interestingly, it's a card to run as 4 and see how often do you get stuck with one in your hand, because it might have a very large target on its back, and kind of gives you this ability to dig into additional rat threats. So really curious to see how the Nashi plays. As far as the later part of the curve, you're dropping a Lord Skitter Sewer King. Could be running 4 of these, especially with how well it synergizes with Vren, just by increasing the overall rat count. So despite this one being a legendary, I often see this one being run as a full playset. And then Vren is, I feel like, the cornerstone of the deck. I feel like this is the card that makes the whole archetype actually work. And so I think that I would have this at least at 3. And but you're dropping those 2 to bring in the 2 copies of the Overlord of the Baelmerk. And so no, it doesn't have the rat synergies, but it does allow you to kind of do the same thing that Nashi's doing, which is milling yourself and then putting those cards into your hand. And it's a very powerful card, no doubt. I think that a lot of people are excited to play it. I just personally would be on the Lord Skitter and the Vren instead of the Overlord of the Baelmerk. So I like the lower substitution more than the upper substitution, if that makes sense. As far as the interaction goes, it looks like you cut probably 1 cut down, and you dropped all of the Go for the Throats. You're still running the Anoint with Affliction, but lowering some of the single point interaction, which if you're playing this in best of 1, I'm not sure about. But again, I think this one's probably a best of 3 deck. And you cut 1 Gix's Command, and you brought in a Duress, which I think is very main boardable. Like I mentioned yesterday, we are seeing a decrease in the creature-centric decks like Celestia Rabbits that makes main decking the Duress quite viable. I think you could even go up higher than 1 if you wanted to. You're also bringing in the 2 copies of the Phantom Interference. Again, this one is kind of meta dependent on, this would be like a flex spot, right? You'd kind of adapt this to what the deck is facing. And the Phantom Interference works well at protecting your board of rats from getting wrathed. We're seeing more control in the meta. And then you have 2 copies of the Virtue of Persistence, and I'm not sold on this one actually being better than the instant speed interaction of like Go for the Throat. But you do have the life stabilization, and then it does give you some later game value. So it's good. It's better in some matchups, worse in others. And my best of 1 brain is like stuck on mono red, which is why I'd want to see like 3 cut downs and 2 Go for the Throats and 2 Anoint with Afflictions, or 4 Go for the Throats, or like getting this number up to 4 for the instant speed interaction is just where my mind's at. Again, I really don't want to say like one is better than the other. I've also seen Patchwork Banner being explored in this archetype, and you have 1 additional pile-on from what I'm used to. Usually this is just a 1 of, but it does work really well with the Go Wide off of the Lord Skitter to just have the almost instantaneous removal that then helps you surveil into a legitimate threat kind of late in the later game. So as far as the best of 3 sideboard goes, I mean, this looks amazing, right? You've got additional Duress for against control, Disdainful Stroke against domain, Liliana the Veil against control, Aclazotz if they lack exile removal and are in mid-range, Malicious Eclipse here for any of the go wide strategies, Rakdos Lizards, Negate for any spell-heavy control lists, domain, and then you've got the Withering Torment as a alternative to some of your like cheaper interaction that is limited on what it can actually hit. So if you're up against like a mid-range deck, you would be bringing in the Withering Torments instead of the cut downs. And I can see where you're going with this, and I think that it's got a really nicely planned out strategy. And honestly, I don't have too much to add other than that. There's a couple of things, like I probably wouldn't be running the Valgavoth's Lair just as a tap land that's like a rainbow land. You know, that was just kind of comes down to personal preference. So thank you, Grimgeist, for your submission. Number 3 was the Orzhov Enchantress by Henrich W 4483. And the first impression, again, I usually start with the lands, is the land count is too high. So you have a very low curve. You don't have any mana sinks that are requiring you to... I shouldn't say you don't have any. You have few mana sinks that are required, being used if you are running in excess of mana. So you do have like the man lands. You do have the putting a +1/+1. But you could probably get away with running a lower land count, even in best of 3 and in paper. So I would try running this deck at 22. And you could even go down to 21 or 20 if you ditch the tap land in best of 1. And there's a couple of... so the general strategy, this feels like you said, you kind of like brushed off the cobwebs of a deck that you had built since Wilds of Eldraine. And because we got sheltered by ghosts, and this card is ridiculous, right? I mean, it is exploding in so many decks right now. Just because of how powerful it is, and I can't believe it's an uncommon. It's great. It's great that it's an uncommon. So my thoughts on the deck is that I kind of want there to be more in the 1-drop area for the sheltered by ghosts, so that because like if you can play this out on turn 2 on a 1-drop, then you pretty much win that game, right? And then like you got the Shard Mage's Rescue. I'd probably bump that up to 4. You had 2 of them in the sideboard. I'd probably get those into the main. Like you could just drop 2 lands and put 2 more Shard Mage's Rescues in, and I think that would be a good place to start. There's a couple of enchantments that I'm not a huge fan of. So the Tale for the Ages, as well as the Lord Skitter's Blessing. I think we just have better enchantment options than these. And then you kind of got this, like, the spell book vendor is able to replace the hex, or the cursed roll is what it was called, on the hex mage. And then you've also got like Ariette, which I haven't been blown away by Ariette of the Charmed Apple. But you are able to, if you have more ways of putting auras onto your opponent's creatures, then I like her a little bit more. And this deck's not really doing that. But you do have you gain X life, where X is the number of auras and your opponents are losing. So like it's an alternative win condition if the board gets bogged down. It's definitely not like the worst card in the world. And then you were saying like the Archon of the Wild Rose, I really, as long as you're leaning into the enchanting your creatures thing, it can work well enough to make as a win condition. And that's kind of why I don't like the Tale for the Ages, is that like, if this is something that's enchanting one of your creatures, or even is just another creature itself, it's going to become a bigger thing with your Archon of the Wild Rose, and I feel like this is kind of unnecessary. So, and then the Lord Skitter's Blessing, like I think you mentioned it in the comments actually, that like the Enduring Innocence is probably a better way to go about just like drawing off of your cheap creatures. Now, you don't have Lord Skitter, and you're going for this kind of lower curve, and so you may need to explore kind of it may work better than I'm giving it credit for, specifically in the Hex Mage vendor enchanting your own creatures with the Archon, but what I want to kind of just talk about briefly is moving the deck more heavily into enchanted creatures, and kind of playing it more like the Boros Auras deck that we're seeing. So like you've got like we could bring in the Ethereal Armor. We've got the Hopeless Nightmare is one that like you could go in for attacking their hand. You don't need to, but if you're going to lean into the enchantments, I do think it's a really good black enchantment. And I think the Hopeless Nightmare, I would rather see it rather than like the Blessing and the Tale for Ages, personally. You've got the Rest in Peace. So there's a couple of cards in here that are how I would build the sideboard, right? So let me address that first, right? So the sideboard that I would suggest starting off with this deck is 4 Duress, 2 Lauren of the Third Path, 4 Temporary Lockdowns, 2 Rest in Peace, because this just dunks on Azorius Oculus, and then 3 Elspeth Smite. So, because that one helps against like the Gruul aggro in best of 3, and Temur midrange. So after that, these are all just suggestions on things that could be interesting to run. Ethereal Armor, if you're going to lean into the Shard Mage's Rescue and the Sheltered by Ghosts, then I think Ethereal Armor is a pretty good option. Hopeless Nightmare, especially if you're going to go into like the Nurturing Pixie. I think the upside to the Nurturing Pixie is that you could just play it out as a 1/1 flyer. So you have interesting stuff you could do later in the game, but if you have it in your opening hand, it makes a perfectly fine target to hit with the Sheltered by Ghosts, because then it's very difficult for them to remove, and it's an evasive threat with lifelink that's going to be impossible to race. So I think the Nurturing Pixie could be fun in the Orzhov space. We've seen it with, we've seen this archetype before, and this is leaning away from the Tithing Blade and more into the enchantments just specifically, but it would be a similar idea. The Optimistic Scavenger, I think, needs to be in this deck, and it's just like a blatant improvement to the Slumbering Keep Guard, and doesn't give you the mana sink, but the power level of just like playing an enchantment every single turn that this deck is very capable of doing then makes the Scavenger a pretty excellent inclusion. Fear of Lost Teeth, I think, is another one too that I think might play better than the Hex Mage if you're moving more towards the enchantments specifically, because this is not itself an enchantment. Feather of Flight we see in like the Boros Auras deck and gives you that kind of like card neutrality. Bandit's Talent could be a way to go about it too, especially if you do lean into the Hopeless Nightmare and the Nurturing Pixie, and kind of playing like some of the tools that we see in Orzhov discard could be brought in, especially because like the sapping them for the 2 life. There's the Victor Valgavoth's Cynical, which has synergies when your enchantments are entering the play, which is why kind of my brain has been in this space, is how can we get the Victor Valgavoth Cynical to work. And Nowhere to Run, I think, is another one that it could be better than the Ossification, depending on how you kind of want to go about your approach. And what's nice about the Nowhere to Run is that if the meta does become saturated with Sheltered by Ghosts, which I think it might, this allows you to not have to pay Ward, and is a really good answer to whatever they enchanted with the Sheltered by Ghosts. So when you're in black, I think this is a good way to counter all of the Sheltered by Ghosts decks that we're seeing. Enduring Tenacity is one that kind of fits in with the Bandit's Talent, and life gain, and like the area of the Charmed Apple. Like you have this ability to gain life off of your Sheltered by Ghosts that then can be turned into damage, and could be a fun one to explore. I'm not sure if it's actually worth including, just an idea. And then Valgavoth's Lair itself is also an enchantment land. So if there is a deck that is going to run the Valgavoth's Lair, I do think that it's going to be a enchantment archetype. And even then, I'm not sold on it, because it is a tap land, and so you can't count it towards your 14 untapped white and 14 untapped black that you're going to want in this kind of archetype. So thanks for the submission. I hope my ideas find you well, and certainly at least try the lands, if nothing else. Lowering the lands, that is. All right, and I think I've done Zigzag 3 times in the last 3 community deck techs. So, like I said, they've just been lucky on the draws in the lottery. So, Zigzag, you did 2 decks, and so I just kind of rolled a die to figure out which one to do, and it landed on the mono white Aura's build. And so this one, we've got the Optimistic Scavenger, right? And we've got the Sheltered by Ghosts, which is really like, it's the core of any white X deck that's doing this strategy, since we got these cards. So I think that the lands look good. I do think that you've got 19 sources of white. I guess it depends on how you count Fountain Port and Merrick's and whatnot. Or Merrick's. But the important thing is that you have the 14 untapped sources of white. So you have 19 total, 14 of which is untapped. And I like that because it gives you a 90% chance that you'll have an untapped white source on turn 1, which allows you to kind of do the nurturing pixie thing that I was mentioning in the other deck that you can hit with the Sheltered by Ghosts. And then you have the Tale for Ages, and the same comment that I brought towards Henrik, I would say that applies here as well. I think we can do better than the Tale for Ages. Because like I get it, but usually this style of deck with all these enchantments ends up being a little bit more Voltron-y, where you're putting everything onto one creature than it is having multiple creatures that are enchanted. So with that in mind, I think that I'd rather be playing some other enchantment. Now, the other thing too is the deck is a little bit low. Like, I want to bring in another 1-drop, right? So right now you're at 17 creatures, I think, and that's if you're counting the Hopeful Vigils. And that's a little bit on the low side for me to justify running the Case of the Uneaten Feast. This card does better with things like Lord Skitter, being able to get kind of this like recurring token generation to give you enough life gain to... Because, like, you're already racing mono red well enough if you're just mulliganing to hit the Sheltered by Ghosts. And then you've also got some, like, go wide payoffs in a deck that's not going wide particularly well. So, like, Case of the Gateway Express is better the more that you're going to create a whole bunch of bodies. And so I think what I'd rather see is, like, a little bit more focus towards just building one really good thing. And to be able to enable the likelihood of having the Sheltered by Ghosts on turn 2, which I think is the strongest line that I've experienced so far with this deck, I would like to bring in something like the Armored Armadillos is seeing a lot of play because of the Ward 1. Market Gnome is seeing some because it at least is card neutral if they do destroy your 1-drop. The Shard Mage's Rescue then comes in as a way to save and kind of play around your opponent's interaction. If they're holding up interaction anticipating you to play the Sheltered by Ghosts, you then play it on turn 3. The Slumbering Keep Guard we've seen in some decks. I do think that this one's kind of the weakest of the 1-drop options. And then Enduring Innocence, I think, is an interesting way to go about it. So if you are bringing in these, if you're increasing the amount of 1-drops dramatically in the deck, then bringing in the Enduring Innocence is a way to kind of counteract having a bunch of really bad draws if the game goes later, right? Because then they're at least replacing themselves whenever they enter the battlefield. So this could be a good archetype to explore with the Enduring Innocence. And I think there is a way to go wide as opposed to go tall with the Voltron builds that Enduring Innocence is probably better for, but it is an enchantment creature, so I think it automatically has to be at least a consideration in the archetype. Then you've got the Invasion of Theros. I want to explore just because it's a way to basically have multiple copies of the Sheltered by Ghosts, and like this card is that strong. I would be tempted, especially because then it also gives you an alternative kind of win condition where there are some matches where attacking the battle is going to be the wrong decision, and so you kind of have to make this like gameplay decision point. But there are some games where flipping it's going to be great, and getting a lifelink indestructible creature that then causes you to draw a card every single time that you're playing an enchantment. I think this is worth exploring. And then this one, for example, is an example of what I think would just be strictly better than a Tale for the Ages, is the Dollmaker's Shop. It allows you to do the go wide thing that works with the Enduring Innocence if you do want to keep the Case of the Gateway Express, and like you could lean into more of a go wide strategy instead of a Voltron strategy with enchantments, and this would be one way to do it, right? The downside with this is that like it is 6 to flip into the gallery, so it's less of a win condition than the Tale for Ages is for the go wide. So just some ideas, some potential inclusions that I hope sparks the the brain juices. And thank you for your submission as always there, Zigzag. I appreciate you. So with that, that's going to be it for the community deck techs. And if you would like to submit your own, look for it on the community tab on October 22nd. So So we're going to skip a week, but I'll try to get it back once my schedule kind of calms down a little bit. So take care, everybody, and I will see you at least by Monday for the best of 1, best of 3 meta review, and maybe Sunday for the best of 1 meta breakers. Take care.